Hello and welcome to Property Fundamentals. This is the channel to get property investment information for cities across the UK. First of all, we'll analyse the data. Then, we'll identify the best areas to invest in. In this video, we'll look at Stoke in 2023. Here we have the mean sold property price by ward for detached properties in Stoke. The wards in the central, eastern part of the city are particularly cheap. These are the sold prices for the semi-detached properties. The wards towards the southwest are generally the most expensive to invest in. With terraced housing, the ward of Handford and Trentham is the most expensive to invest in. For flats, the same trend of terraced houses is present, and Handford and Trentham is the most expensive to invest in. And finally, we have the combined sold prices for all property types. The overall price trend for Stoke is that the southern wards are the most expensive to invest in. This is a map of the main transport routes in Stoke. There are multiple train lines which pass through the city, and the M6 motorway passes to the west of the city. These are the Ofsted ratings for schools in Stoke. There are good schools throughout the town and only a few poor performing schools. Here are the institutions of higher education in Stoke. Most of these institutions are located in the centre of the city, making this an ideal location for student-leds. The dark blue areas show places which have a flooding risk within Stoke. The areas of Stoke which the Trent River passes through have a higher risk of flooding than other areas. With burglary over a 3-month period, the ward of Etruria and Hanley is the worst affected. For universal credit, the wards at the central, western part of the city have a particularly high number of claimants. Finally, for housing benefit, the wards at the central, eastern part of the city have a particularly high number of claimants. Now that we've looked at the data, we can analyse it to find the best areas within Stoke to invest. Before this, if you haven't already, I'd recommend you watch my other video which explains how to interpret this analysis. The map below shows the desirability of the various wards within Stoke. Data from the housing benefit claimants, universal credit claimants, burglary data, flooding and schools have been collated to give an overall picture of which areas are desirable and which are not. The main point of interest for location desirability within Stoke is that the picture is mixed. There are desirable and undesirable areas next to each other, which means that property investors will need to be careful about which areas they invest in. The tables below show the quantified results of the average property prices for all property types and the desirability ranking. Generally, the wards which are the cheapest are the least desirable and vice versa. We are looking for exceptions where a desirable area is cheap, as this is an area which may provide a high return on investment over the long term. These cheap but desirable areas will become more obvious when we visualize the data. Here we have a visualization of the average property prices against location desirability for the wards in Stoke. The data shows that most wards are as expected because the least desirable wards are cheap and the most desirable wards are expensive. At the bottom end of the market, the ward of Fenton West and Mount Pleasant, and also Fenton East, are good options. They are some of the cheapest wards, but they have a higher quantified desirability than many of the wards which are more expensive. In the mid-range part of the market, the wards of Burslem Park and Birches Head and Central Forest Park have a very high desirability, but are fairly cheap. These represent good value for property investors. Finally, there are a few wards to avoid because they are either very undesirable or they may not be worth the price, given their desirability. Joyner Square and Abbey Halton and Townsend have very low desirability, and therefore it is probably best to avoid them as capital growth prospects would be low. Mere South has average location desirability, but it is very expensive, and therefore it is unlikely to represent good value to an investor. Thank you for watching this episode of Property Fundamentals. Please like and subscribe, and I will see you again next time.